I have released multiple games, and debugging is the one skill that separates people who finish from people who quit. And the difference here is not talent, it's having one repeatable system when something breaks. So before we cover the step-by-step protocol for what to do after you encounter an error, to not only fix it but also to understand it, we first need to know the 3 most important types of errors and generally how we're going to fix them. And also this is going to be taken directly from the lessons inside of Smartiny on how to debug your own code. So you know this is going to be high quality advice. Okay, so what's the 3 most important types of errors? I'm going to cover these 3 and I'm also going to give you the most obvious solution to them, which is going to be the most obvious thing that you can try to do before you do the step-by-step protocol that I'm going to teach you later in this video. So these 3 types is going to be syntax errors, it's going to be runtime errors, and it's going to be logical errors. The last one is going to be the most dangerous one. So let's start with syntax errors. What is a syntax error? Very easily explained. Well, that's going to be that the computer can't understand what you wrote. It can read what you wrote because you wrote it in the wrong way. So this is where you break the language rules of the programming language. So it can be, for example, you just forget a semicolon. It can be when you capitalize wrong, so you have a lowercase letter when it really should be uppercase. Or for example, it can be that you miss a bracket, like a curly bracket, or you have one extra. It can be all these different things. 50% of cases, for example, when you miss a semicolon or you have an extra bracket or you miss a bracket, then the IDE is going to tell you like specifically what the issue is. So syntax errors is usually the easiest to actually understand. And the beautiful thing with syntax errors is that the more advanced you get in programming, the less you're going to do this, because then programming is going to be like second nature to you. It's going to be like English. So you basically know the language and the syntax. So a syntax error is a very beginner error to get. It's something that you're going to encounter less and less the more advanced you get. So just the most obvious fix for a syntax error is going to be to read the error message. And as I said, in 50% of cases, it's going to like explicitly tell you where and what the problem is. So to fix this, just read the message. It's going to say you miss a semicolon, you have an extra bracket, you miss a bracket, or it's going to say like the specific line of code and it's going to say that what they're saying, it doesn't understand it. Then basically just go into that line of code. The IDE is going to give you the red line, it's going to be like grayed out if it doesn't understand what the line of code is. So just try to read that line of code, try to see what the issue here is. And it's going to be usually very easy to fix. Now moving on to runtime errors, this is not the same as syntax errors where it's something that only beginners get. This is something that advanced people also can get, like advanced developers. They can also get this, but it's going to be to a lesser degree. When you are a beginner, this is going to be probably one of the most it's going to be very confusing for you, but in reality it's very logical and it's easy to understand once you just understand it, what it is and stuff. So what is a runtime error? Very simply explained. Well, it's basically when the game started and it panicked. You, for example, reference something that doesn't exist. So for example, you try to reference a script that doesn't exist. You try to reference a collider that doesn't exist, a rigid body that doesn't exist, and you try to use something that doesn't exist, like then the computer doesn't know what to do. And in programming, what doesn't exist mean is basically going to be that it's null. It's going to be null, and that means that it hasn't been assigned, or it has been assigned but you somehow unassigned it in code. It can also be things like dividing by 0, so you just do something that doesn't work. Like you do something and the program doesn't know what to do with it. But the most obvious and common case of this is basically where you just reference something that doesn't exist, i.e. something is going to be null. So to fix this, it's very important to add checks. So for example, only do something with the reference. So for example, only use the rigid body, for example, to use physics when you know that the rigid body is not null. So you might, for example, see in code, you've probably seen this before, that a lot of people that write is rigid body, or whatever it might be, is game object, rigid body, collider, whatever, is this null? And if it's null, then you return the statement and you don't execute the code that includes the rigid body. So this is basically just to prevent that the game crashes. If it's null, then it's just going to prevent that the game crashes. But the best fix is obviously to just assign the rigid body before you use it. So the simple fix here is just to add checks and also to think about edge cases and just always think about, have I assigned this thing before I use it? Now moving on to logical errors, this is going to be the most dangerous one. So let's talk about it. This is also probably going to be the one that applies the most to the step-by-step framework and the protocol that I'm going to tell you later, because these are dangerous. These are the most common to struggle errors with. So we're going to talk about them. In short, a logical error is basically when the computer, it does exactly what you told it. There's no errors, it doesn't print a message, but it behaves the wrong way. So what you told it is wrong. This can be, for example, that the score is incorrect, enemy behavior is weird, the player movement feels weird, you like teleport, something is destroyed when it shouldn't be, the UI updates at the wrong time. This is basically problems in your instructions. So this can be, for example, when you order things the wrong way. So you, for example, do something that you should do after something else before. So you just order it the wrong way. It can also be a very common thing that I still do, even though I'm more advanced and I've released games, I still do this, is where I just have the angle brackets wrong. So instead of writing the more than, for example, I might type the less than, and then obviously these are two completely different things, so the result is going to be all messed up. It can be very small things like this. Very often it might be even in an if statement in the example I told you, where you, for example, mix the or and the and operator and you mix the angle brackets, for example. You meant to have the angle brackets or equal to, and then it's equal to, and then very commonly it's going to be an if statement. But logical errors is going to be so many different things. So unlike syntax errors where you can basically just read the error message, I can just give you a, okay, do this, then fixed. I can't do that for logical errors because it's going to be so big. But one thing that I'm going to tell you, like just the most logical, obvious fix for logical errors in general, is going to be to read the code out loud. So you just find the section of the code that you might think encounters the error. So for example, if it's a movement error, go into your player movement and find like the specific lines of code that controls the movement. Then just go through them line by line and explain them out loud in English. But we're going to talk more about them in the step-by-step protocol that I'm going to give you. And I'm also just going to say, I know there are more types of errors like semantic errors, performance errors, or integration errors. But as a beginner, it won't benefit you from understanding these right now. I think if you just focus on these three and you follow the step-by-step protocol that I give you, you don't need to overcomplicate it any more than that. So now we can talk about how you're actually going to figure out the solution for errors if the obvious fix that I gave you for each of them doesn't work. And very often the obvious fix is going to work and it's going to fix the problem very quickly. But in a lot of cases, you're sitting there scratching your head and you don't know what to do because they didn't work. And the problem is more advanced than simply just a missing semicolon. And instead of just finding the solution, like you can obviously just go on ChatGPT. That's going to be the most effective way to actually just figure out the solution. But you're not going to learn anything from that. When you are a beginner, you shouldn't focus on fixing the errors like as efficiently, as quickly as possible. What you should do is just focus on learning. So when you ask, for example, ChatGPT, that's only when you recognize the thing. You might ask, okay, explain this to me, please. And then you might think, okay, that's learning. Now I learned the thing. But the thing with that is when you just ask ChatGPT to explain the thing for you, you aren't actually understanding it because you never struggle with the thing itself. You only got the explanation and the recognition for it. So you can sure recognize what the line of code does, but it's not going to be like assigned in your long-term memory in your brain because you didn't struggle with the thing and you didn't use the thing practically. The only thing you did was actually just read the instructions and read the explanation from ChatGPT, which maybe uses like 5% of your brain to read. You're not going to understand it, and when you encounter the problem in the future, you're not going to remember it. And you might have to ask ChatGPT the same thing again. And this is where you come into this loop where you have the same issue hundreds of times and you still need to ask ChatGPT for like the very basic solution that you basically should know yourself. And this is how beginners stay stuck. So what we need to do instead is going to be to understand the thing. And how do we understand the thing? I kind of told you a little before, but that's going to be to try yourself first, just struggle with the thing first, and then you can Google the solution afterwards if you can figure the solution out by struggling yourself. And this both worked for me. So when I started Game Open, I was stuck in tutorial hell. I didn't learn anything, like I can do a simple thing even after watching hours of tutorials. But when I actually implemented the struggling that I talked about right now, not only in debugging code, but also when I'm making new things and adding new features, when I implemented the struggling, I noticed that I learned things so much better. This is the only time I actually learned something. So struggling for learning is awesome. It's basically a cheat code if you want to get ahead of 99% of all the developers. It's not to immediately just do the easiest solution because right now when we have ChatGPT, we have so many easy things. It's very easy to just fall into the trap of using ChatGPT, then not learning any programming ourselves. But how are we going to stand out when ChatGPT can do everything for us and everyone is just making AI games? How are we going to stand out then? And I'm going to tell you, Smartini is built upon these exact proven learning strategies. So instead of Smartini just being a course where I tell you like what buttons to click, and you just follow along my screen share for 200 hours and you're making the game that I planned, and you won't remember anything from it because you just recognize the thing. As I told you, you want to understand it. I'll actually guide you through learning everything yourself. You're going to start by learning scripting, making your first experiments, your first prototypes, planning your first game, and then releasing your first game, all within only 60 days. I also have a 60-day release guarantee, so if you don't release within 60 days, I'll personally coach you for free because I'm so confident that you will. I'll also beta test your game just before release, so it's going to be an awesome deal for you. It's the first link in the description if you want to learn more. Okay, so with that being said, now you know how we're actually going to learn. You know that we need to understand something to actually be able to have it in our long-term memory, and not just ask ChatGPT and recognize the thing. So how are we going to apply this like very practically? And the thing is, if you remember from before, I said that logical errors, they're not going to give you the error message. So it's not going to be an error message, but the program itself, the movement, for example, the UI, is going to not behave as you intended to. But you're not going to get this red line, and the program is going to run just fine, but there's just a behavior error. And that's going to be the difference, so I'm going to split them into two different categories, the one with error messages and the one without. Let's start with the ones that have error messages, because these are going to be like a little simpler, because if you're a beginner, they're most likely going to be very simple as well. So let's talk about them. So if you have a bug with error messages, what you should do first is just to read the error message. It's going to be very obvious. Try to understand it, try to like think, what does this mean? And then try to extract as much information out of it as possible. And also open the line of code. So if you double click in Unity at least, if you double click, you're going to be directed in your IDE to the specific line of code that caused the problem. So just think, what is wrong with this? And then do the most obvious things first. So did I write this correctly? Does this error tell me what I did wrong? Like, just think about this. If it, for example, says that, oh, I don't recognize this specific thing, then you probably spelled it correctly, it's a typo, or you capitalized it wrong, because all programming languages in game development is case sensitive. So think about that capitalization, and just think, do I have a typo in this line? Because you're a beginner, very likely it's going to be a typo or a very like basic thing. But if that's not the case, then you should think about it being a runtime error. So you might read the error and it might say null reference exception error or null reference exception. And in that case, you need to think about, did I ensure that this thing is actually not null? Does it actually exist before I use it? And in that case, just make sure you assign the thing either in the inspector, for example, or you add null checks and then your own Debug.Log errors to better explain what the line of code does, and so that you aren't going to get any weird behavior or crashes in your game. So if you have like this null reference exception error, you might just read it like, okay, null, that means it doesn't exist, and it gives you the line of code, and you can probably like understand what the problem here is. And in that case, as I said, just assign the thing before you use it, or make sure it's not null at least. Okay, so that's really good. Before I cover what you should do if you can't figure the solution out yourself, after you try these things that I told you, how to like search for the thing and still actually learn from it while searching, I'm going to go over what you should do when you have a logical error, i.e. you don't have a error message in the console. So step one to fix a logical error where you have no error messages is going to be to just go through the obvious. Have I assigned the script to the game object that I wanted to? This is something that I still do. I sometimes forget when I'm making the script to assign it to the game object. That's obviously fine. Also very easy to do wrong. Like these very obvious things, that's probably going to be like 40% of the issues in your code might be very obvious things. Or when you're a beginner, it might be more like 70%. So you're going to fix 70% of logical errors just by fixing the obvious. Have I assigned the script? Have I called this function? So when you make a function, do you actually call it, or did you just write it and it's never called? Also, as I said, go through the if statement. So for example, do I have like the correct angle brackets? Do I have the correct operator? Do I have the or operator? Do I have the and operator? Do I compare the right variables, for example? Go through this if statement. And you also might want to go through the order that you call the functions or the order that you do something in your script. So if you do something that you should really do after another thing and you do that thing before, then obviously it's going to cause some issues. So around 70% of your issues are going to be fixed by just fixing the obvious things. Just go through the very obvious things very, very quickly. Just be conscious, okay, this is very likely an obvious thing, so just fix that. But in a lot of cases, it's not going to be that obvious. And the second step then is going to be to see the values of your variables. So in Unity, for example, you can open the debug inspector. you can then see the private variables and you can see the values of them. So if you're, for example, making a jumping mechanic and the player doesn't jump, you can, for example, open the debug inspector and you can see the can jump boolean, the variable for them. If it's, for example, never true, even when you touch the ground, if it's never true, then you know the issue is that you probably forgot to assign it to true, or the collision check for actually when it's hitting the ground or the cooldown, for example, might be wrong if the can jump never turns true. So you can see the variables there. If the value is wrong, then you know the solution immediately. It can also, for example, be if you you want to move the player and the player doesn't move or it moves very slowly. You can open it, you can see the move speed, or you can see the can run or can move. You can see the variables there. If the move speed is, for example, like 0, then obviously you're not going to move the player because, yeah, you know, I don't need to explain why you're not going to move the player if the values are 0. You can also write Debug.Logs or whatever your game engine might be. You can just write logs so that you're going to see the variables very cleanly, and you're also going to see when the code runs. And also you can use this to see what order they run in. So Debug.Logs are very, very useful when you have logical errors or debug warnings, errors, whatever it might be. Just adding these throughout the code, even if you don't have an issue, just adding these so that you know like immediately when you have an issue is going to be really useful. But you can just skip this and do it very quickly by just opening the debug inspector in your game engine. And then the reason why I told these things first is going to be that these are very simple things to do. Like opening the debug inspector in Unity is going to take you like 3 seconds. And obviously going through the obvious things are going to take you a minute. So these are the easiest things to do, very quick. And those are probably 90% of your issues as a beginner. And the third one and the last thing is going to be to read the relevant code out loud in English. And the reason why I told this, as I said, last is because this is going to be like the most time consuming, even though they're all quite easy and quick. This is going to be the most time consuming. I think these other ones, they're just very quick, so you should do them first. But the third one, read the code out loud in English. So you can go through the relevant code. So for example, if you have a jumping issue, the player doesn't jump or they can jump like too much, whatever it might be, then just go through the relevant code, go through the function where you actually jump, and then just read the code out loud. So, okay, first I check if the player has a rigid body. Okay, that's nice. And then you check if the jump force is like bigger than 0 or whatever, just to be safe. Okay, that's good. But you actually see that, this angle bracket is wrong. I checked if it's less than 0, and no, it's not less than 0. So that should be true. You just wrote the angle bracket wrong, wherever it might be. Okay, so that's really good. Now you should have covered like 90% of the issues that you might encounter in code. But since there are a lot of issues, a lot of these issues that we encounter not going to be that simple, and it's not going to be that easy to fix. So then we need to know how we're actually going to seek the solution without just cheating and not learning anything from it. We actually want to learn even though we're searching for the solution. So actually trying ourselves, that's the most important thing. But if you can't do it after like 10 minutes, 15 minutes, depending on like the difficulty and your skill and whatever it might be, depending on these different things, after around 10-15 minutes of struggling and trying yourself, you can use Google to try to figure out the solution. So you don't want to use AI or tutorials here. And the reason for that is simply because Google is still going to be like the struggle thing. So it's not going to be too easy, but it's also not going to be too hard to just search for the thing on Google. And when I say Google, you should use not the AI version of Google, just the AI solution. Just ignore that, turn it off, whatever. What you should do is just use official documentation, use official forums, use Stack Overflow, Reddit, or Quora. These very like dry discussion things where you're going to get the answer, but it's not going to be like specifically tailored to you. So you still need to think about, how is this relevant to my line of code? How am I going to implement this solution? You still need to think, and you're still getting the solution, but you need to think to actually implement it. If you're, for example, watching a tutorial, you're going to recognize a lot of the things and you're just going to have it in your front of your memory, but you're not going to struggle with the thing because it's going to be so easy for you that you're not going to remember it. And the same applies to AI, for example. When AI gives us the solution, it's going to be very, very tailored to you, and it's basically just going to be copy and paste. 90% of the bugs that you have as a beginner is going to be resolved by using Google. If you can't, then use tutorials. If you somehow can't figure the solution out with tutorials, then use AI, but ask it to explain it to you. But if you haven't figured the solution out for like 1 hour, then you should use AI. This is going to be very rare, or at least I hope it does. So that's everything I had for this video. I just want to mention that this is just one of many modules that I have inside of Smartini. Like, this is not the entire module, but this is based upon the debugging your own code module that I have inside of Smartini, which is a part of the category where you make your first experience. So if you want to have like the entire step-by-step blueprint to release your first game in 60 days and all the possible mistakes that you can make throughout, completely covered so you won't fall into any traps throughout the way, then you can join Smartini with the first link below to guarantee that you're going to release your first game in only 60 days or less. So thank you so much for watching, join Smartini, and yeah, thank you for watching.